With enemies like these, this can hardly be called a fight. Crumble and dissipate. Embrace your end in truth. Hypocritical beings. He's the final symphony of death. Noisy. I'll keep going. And you will too. Right? With enemies like these, this can hardly be called a fight. Disperse. Embrace your end in truth. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and dissipate. Disperse. Embrace your end in truth. Pointless resistance. Hypocritical. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and dissipate. Embrace your end in truth. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and dissipate. I'll keep going. And you will too. Right? Crumble and dissipate. Disperse. Embrace your end in truth. He's the final symphony of death. Crumbling, embrace your end in truth. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and embrace your end in truth. It ends here. Pointless resistance. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and embrace your end in truth. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and hypocrite. Embrace your end in truth. Pointless resist. Hypocritical. Annihilate. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. I'll keep going. And you will too. Right? With enemies like these, this can hardly be called a fight. Has the hunt begun? Crumble and dissipate. Embrace your end in truth. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. I'll keep going. And you will too. Right? With enemies like these, this can hardly be called a fight. Crump has the hunt begun. Embrace your end in truth. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and dissipate. Embrace your end in truth. Noisy. He's the final symphony of death. Embrace your end in truth. Final symphony of death. Has the hunt begun? Embrace your end in truth. Crumble and dissipate. Hypocritical beings. He's the final symphony of death. Has the hunt begun? Embrace your end in truth. Noisy. Pointless, hypocritical beings. Pointless is a key to the final symphony of death. I'll keep going. And you will too. Right? With enemies like these, this can hardly be called a fight. Crumble has the hunt begun. Hypocrite, embrace your end in truth. It ends here. He's the final symphony of death. Crumble and break your end in truth. Symphony of death. Crush and break your end in truth. It ends here. Hypocritical beings. Silence. Pointless resistance. He's the final symphony of death. And break your end in truth. He's the final symphony of death. And break your end in truth. Final symphony of death. I'll keep going. And you will too. Right?